But I'd like to move on to Leigh, and Leigh's going to talk to us about yoga and the yogic approach to preventative medicine.
Thank you, Ranjit. And particularly thank you to Craig and Tim, who've just done half my work for me. It's great being the third presenter because I can say yes, all of that. Yoga and Ayurveda, for example, are like two sides of the one coin. You can choose to look at one side, but the other side is always there. And they both derive from at least 3 of the 6 ancient darshanas or philosophical systems of the Indian culture, of yoga, samkhya and tantra. And so, as Tim was saying, really what we are is this field of consciousness. And through various principles or models, we come to this manifestation made up of these 5 elements. And the mind is part of that manifestation. But for yoga to look at prevention, and when I say yoga, I'm not just talking about yoga asana. Yoga asana is one small part of yoga. According to Patanjali, the great sage about 2,000 years ago, it's less than 1/8. It's 3 sutras out of 195 sutras. In the West, we seem to focus on it a lot. Most yoga, up until around 1200, 1400 AD, was strongly based upon meditation, lifestyle. The physical side of yoga really came in as part of this tantric field, of which hatha yoga, the postural yoga we're so familiar with, is a subset. And underlying all yoga practice was, in order for us to find well-being, to prevent illness, we need, in fact, to dive deeply into the well of our being, which I think well-being is a great word to describe what yoga is about. It helps us to reconnect with that deep well of our being, which is always there. We don't have to make something. We simply just remove that which is in the way, exactly the same way as Ayurveda does. But it's often said that Ayurveda in traditional culture is very much like the medical system, and yoga is like the lifestyle, the psychology. In fact, I would suggest that yoga was probably the first codified psychology in the world. If we read carefully Patanjali's Darshana, the Yoga Sutras, it's very clear this is about psychology. Yoga is about the mind, as Craig was saying. If the mind is not right, all else goes astray. Now, when people practice yoga in the West, there is a great confusion. We use the word hatha yoga, and yet we're at the same time using the word Raj yoga. They can blend together very nicely, like oil and vinegar, and make a lovely dressing. But essentially they are different, and we need to understand that. So that hatha yoga, the word hatha means with force, is a very strong therapeutic practice. It talks about removing vata, pitta, kapha, removing the wind, the bile and the phlegm. Very strong practices. And yet most yoga teachers will talk about having good health and preventing illness through the practice of what we often call Patanjali's yoga or Raja yoga, where we have this wonderful blend of the postures, the pranayama, the breath work, the meditation, and the lifestyle injunctions, which is the yama and niyama. Okay, the things we really should be doing and things we shouldn't be doing for ourselves, for the world. And when we understand that yoga is actually a blend of all those elements of the Raj yoga, taking some of the aspects of hatha yoga that actually fit with the yoga that seems to work for us in our society, which is the Raj yoga, the contemplative yoga. We seem to have the yoga that we practice in the West for those who have gone deep enough and have practiced long enough. And so the key to prevention in the practice of yoga, according to Patanjali, in his Sutra 114, I've got a couple of my students in the room, they'll be saying, here he goes, 114 again, is the practice needs to be over a long period of time, consistent, regular practice. So yoga as a preventative tool is not something, something's out of balance, my vata is a little deranged, I'm feeling the accumulation, the aggravation, it's going to spread from the colon into the bones, and this is sort of an Ayurvedic approach, really useful to pick up these things at accumulation stages, Tim is saying. But in yoga, we say, just do the practice. Every day, let's do our sadhana, our regular daily practice. And for some people, that will be a little asana, hopefully some pranayama, almost always some meditation. And the asana can be the meditation. So we don't have to separate the two. Yoga doesn't separate body and mind. This is I would say it's the ultimate mind-body well-being practice, because it just does not see the difference between body and mind. Mind, as we know, is the non-local mind. I mean, every cell of the body is part of our mind. Psychoneuroimmunology is teaching us that. And so with yoga practice, we are bringing mind and body to the mat, inverted commas, every day. And because of that, our mind starts to turn inward a little bit. The time when we do our practice, whether it be 10 minutes of asana and 10 minutes of sitting quietly with our mantra or with something else, we remove our tendency to have an external locus of awareness, and we have an internal locus of awareness. An external locus of awareness, we're worried about what this person will think. We're worried about the money from that quarter or that quarter. All those things that are out there. The internal locus of awareness says, who am I? What am I? Why am I? And does that matter? So our daily practice brings us back to what Craig was talking about, the moment, the mindfulness, maybe people could even say mindlessness or mind quietness. And every single practice, every aspect of yoga sadhana needs to be mindful, otherwise it's not a yoga practice. And in our contemporary societies, we often see a physical practice of yoga. I've even seen pranayama techniques taught without any mindfulness. It's just huff and puff and count it. And we need to be sure that the mind is connecting with the practice. And when it does, as I said before, we turn inward a little bit. And because we're turning inward, our internal locus of awareness, we become aware of the things that Tim was talking about, those imbalances. We start to recognise them quickly. And over time, through regular practice and through not being attached to our practice, yoga teachers here know about Sutra 1.12, we need to have that regular practice and we need to let go and not hold on. So yoga at its core is teaching us this wonderful thing called vairagya, not to be confused with a certain medication that sounds similar. To let go, to disidentify from all the things that are causing us those stresses, to step back a little bit, to actually feel ourselves as the field, to be the spacious awareness that we really are, and to then observe that there is the lira, the play that we are playing out as part of our life, and to be able to disidentify from what it is in order to make better decisions, to help unwind the habits that are getting us into trouble. A small component of the preventative benefits of the yoga practice we have nowadays, which I'm sort of calling this quasi-combination, this oil and vinegar combination of Raj Yoga and Hatha Yoga, is that there are actually somatic benefits of what we do with the body. When we move the body in certain ways, this compression and release in certain organs can create blood flow in certain ways. By moving the body in certain directions and opening the body and creating spaciousness, we allow subtle energy to flow through our nadis and our shrotas. Yeah. So we are creating certainly a physical benefit. And you mentioned digestion a moment ago. I was interviewed at 4 o'clock this afternoon, just before I left home, by I think it's Good Health magazine. This is how the press acts nowadays. What is the single best posture for somebody to improve their digestion? And I'm going, oh no, not one of these questions again. Unfortunately, they'll print a posture, but because I went through all the thing of, it's not about the posture and a whole range of things. But yeah, every single unwellness can at least get some benefit from a yoga practice. And I'm saying unwellness as a distinction from illness, because there becomes a place where a regular practice of yoga, and the role of the yoga teacher needs to hand over to the medical field, people more skilled and with greater knowledge in the complementary or naturopathic field, Ayurveda or other things, or to a yoga therapist who has further training. A yoga teacher in Australia, there's a registration process for yoga teachers in Australia. They need to have registration with Yoga Australia now to be recognised in a whole range of areas, both nationally and internationally, including health insurance. But in yoga therapy, the same thing is occurring. We now have a registration process, and we lead the world in the therapeutic application of yoga. I'm on an international committee in the United States, developing standards and implementing standards for yoga therapists right now, and they took our standards as a starting point. So we're doing good things. That was a little plug for how we're doing well in Australia with those things. So thank you.
So the common theme of the mind and consciousness, and Gautamji is going to take us a little bit deeper into that and explore that in relation to prevention and promoting health and wellness.
Hello, so I'm here to speak on prevention of illness with regards to Vedanta. Vedanta is the spiritual aspect of Hinduism, the deep philosophical part of it. Vedanta looks more at the mind, the subconscious aspects of the mind, and even beyond that, into what is called pure consciousness. From a medical point of view, then Vedanta can look at illness in two ways. One is that the body and its progression, transformation and modification, in which 6 modifications are posited in the form of change for the body. Asti, jayate, vartate, viparinamate, apakshiyate and vinashyati. These are Sanskrit terms. Conception, birth, growth, maturation, decay, and death. These 6 modifications of the body are considered to be inevitable. Of course, what we seek is to prolong a state of well-being and delay the onset of decay and death. With regards to these inevitable modifications, then Vedanta then looks at how can the mind face this inevitability. Looking at the function of the mind and its connection to the body, that pain of the body can be exacerbated through the mind's imbalance or inability to deal with the situation at hand. That leads to what's called suffering. So the pain of the body may not be optional, but suffering can be optional. Suffering is at the level of the mind. And so Vedanta focuses more on the management of the mind, strengthening the mind so it can hopefully prevent an early detection of illness, and also help to accept if there is a condition of illness. As such, Vedanta will have to be used in conjunction with other sciences. So now looking at the mind, mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho, it posits that the mind is the cause of our suffering. Suffering can come in the form of 3 ways. Many ways are there, but 3 large and obvious ways are given. One is called fear, bhayam. One is called confusion, moha. And the last one is called shoka, or regret. And when we look at how this relates to our life, when we look at our past, disturbance from the past is called regret. Disturbance with regards to the future is called bhayam, or fear. And disturbance with regards to the present situation is called moha, or confusion. These 3 disturbances affect the mind. Then the mind with these disturbances then has an influence because of its connection with the body. So it then leads to changes in the body as such. changes in the body's well-being. Because the person also cannot be taken completely in isolation as their mind or their body. Vedanta also posits that many causes start from subtle regions and then express at a gross level. So the subtler regions will be the subconscious leading to the conscious mind and then manifesting at a physical level. So with regards to prevention, Vedanta focuses more on trying to address subconscious and conscious levels of the mind. How to deal with, as we said, these three: regret, confusion, and anxiety or fear. Fear, of course, has many different levels, from insecurity to anxiety to an abject terror because of a death or dangerous situation in front of a person. Vedanta then gives various techniques, but the key is to learn what is called self-diagnosis, what we may call Atma Parikshanam, examination of oneself, to start becoming more aware of the subtle changes that are taking place at the level of the conscious mind. So, what does precipitate my individual anxiety? What precipitates my individual confusion? And of course, what am I carrying in the form of guilt, in the form of regret? This becomes a very individualized and personalized discovery. And so, therefore, in Vedanta, the training is for the individual to come to reflect, analyze, and introspect upon themselves. The process can be broken down into three levels. And one is called detection, one is called negation, and the last one is called substitution. In detection, there has to be a very honest and open identification of what disturbances are taking place at the level of the conscious mind. For this to take place effectively, then qualities such as being able to distance or detach oneself from the mind become very important. As long as we are identified with the mind very strongly, there can be levels of denial. And through these levels of denial, then an inaccurate diagnosis then takes place. So Vedanta helps to create that distancing between oneself and the mind. So this distancing is called adopting what is called the witness attitude. So Sakshi Bhava. And in a witness attitude, I come to watch the flow of thoughts as they pass through my conscious mind without judgment. No matter how terrible, how disturbing those thoughts may be, I try to observe them as an independent witness and merely take note of them. As we become more proficient in this, early detection of mental disturbance can take place. We also come to notice habits or patterns of thinking, emoting. These patterns are created because of subconscious impressions. So as we come to watch the thoughts, we start looking for patterns. And these patterns give us identification of subconscious impressions, which have almost been laid out like the channels in which rivers are about to flow. As we come to identify this, we are now getting right to the very cause and root of mental disturbance, which later can manifest as physical illness. So Vedanta focuses on this aspect in terms of prevention. As I mentioned, once onset of an illness has taken place, then Vedanta and its role is then to prevent denial, which means to accept the situation at hand. And with greater acceptance, reduction in suffering takes place. Also, more effective treatment can take place through other modalities, because a person becomes, well, they accept the condition they have and then move forward into the treatment that is required. Many times people are diagnosed late because largely they are denying the fact that they are in a state of ill health. So many people don't want to see doctors because they know when I see the doctor, he's going to tell me my cholesterol is bad. He's going to tell me I need to start exercising. He's going to tell me I need to change my lifestyle, slow things down. Yeah? And this is because we are not willing to accept the situation at hand. Vedanta helps us to accept so we can get into more immediate and effective treatment regimes, which I said will have to be in conjunction with other forms of medicine and natural paths as well. So from this point, Vedanta is looking or can facilitate prevention at a deeper level of the subconscious and conscious mind.
So sometimes, despite all best efforts with exercise, diet, various things, we become unhealthy. And I'd now like to move into Craig and talk about ischemic heart disease, one of the most common conditions in the Western world that causes much suffering, and the role of meditation and mindfulness in patients with heart problems.
Well, the activation of the so-called stress response or fight or flight response is pretty good while we're trying to get away from a target. But activating this response at 3 o'clock in the morning with a mental target, anticipating this fear, this anticipation, the mind projecting into events that haven't even happened, or replaying stressors from the past, produces a very profound effect physiologically and metabolically that is an inappropriate activation of the response. It's not experienced as like a turbocharge of energy, it's experienced as anxiety. And mind you, although I'm talking about anxiety, same thing's happening in depression, anger and hostility. All of these unhelpful emotional states produce this overactivation of this activation system. From a heart point of view, well, the medical term for it is allostatic load. It puts a wear and tear on the system that it was not designed to take. And so it affects us metabolically, blood cholesterol, blood pressure, blood glucose and so on. It thickens the blood, increases the risk of the heart going into arrhythmias and so on. What we're doing is we're creating a physiological soup in our own system. It's going to predispose us to heart disease, and indeed it does. So consistently poor mental health, recurrent depression, for example, increases 3 to 5-fold the risk of getting ischemic heart disease, independent of exercise, cholesterol, or any other risk factor you care to measure. That's how profound the effect of the mind on the body is. You give a person antidepressants to treat their depression, you don't do anything to reduce their risk of heart disease. In fact, a lot of the early antidepressants increased even further the chance of getting heart problems. They didn't reverse it. You give psychological approaches to helping to switch off the unnecessary activation of that response, cultivate more positive emotional states, and you do significantly reduce the person's risk of having further events with their heart disease. So the research around meditation, it produces the opposite of the activation response, called the relaxation response. I think one of the tricks is not getting anxious about trying to relax. Has anybody here ever gotten anxious or very tense trying to relax? That doesn't help very much. So actually learning to feel comfortable, even in the presence of distress, this witnessing attitude, I think, is really important in that regard. It's a very important part of not accentuating it. What is also, and I'd just like to mention briefly, is very interesting, is that the only kinds of programs that have ever been, or treatment that's ever been shown to reverse already significant or advanced ischemic heart disease has actually been based on yoga principles and the work of Professor Dean Ornish from the States, who took up a lot of these things when he was a young man to help him as a stressed medical student, and made a profound difference to his health. But when he became a cardiologist, he said, I'll take these principles and I'll turn them into a rehabilitation program for people with heart disease. And it was based on meditation, a supportive group environment. He said, if you don't get the mind right, don't get the motivation right, you can't make the other changes. But physical activity, a low-fat vegetarian diet, stopping smoking and so on. So very simple things. But what he actually demonstrated angiographically, symptomatically, was people who had heart disease, who took on that program, their body started to do its own angioplasty. It demonstrated clearly, and he published in the Lancet and the Journal of the American Medical Association, this was absolutely gold standard research, that the body will repair itself if we give it the right conditions to do that. Exactly what Tim was saying before about the movement towards balance and health is a natural one. It's more a matter of getting out of the way of that happening. And that's that. So it's actually meditation, if you like, as a foundation for a much more holistic lifestyle integrated approach. Those same principles, if you don't mind me mentioning cancer, for people with men with early prostate cancer, has also shown reversal of all the cancer markers for men with early prostate cancer if they took on the same principles. Switching off the prostate cancer genes, switching on repair enzymes right in the DNA of the cells, and very unlikely that early prostate cancer would go on to become an aggressive or life-threatening prostate cancer. And so these kinds of principles are actually based on the lifestyle elements that were inherent in the yoga and Indian tradition, but just given a different language and given a different context and given a different way of studying it. The same principles too have just been applied to multiple sclerosis. Again, it's assumed you can't reverse multiple sclerosis, but quite independently, Professor George Jelinek, who's just based at St Vincent's Hospital just down the road here, who got MS himself as a professor of emergency medicine, said there's nothing that modern medicine can do. He looked at all the research, and the program he came to for MS is remarkably similar to the conclusions Ornish came to. He's actually demonstrating now reversal of MS for people who've even had that condition for a number of years. So people are on an upward trend in terms of improvement. Brain scans are improving and so on, which was not thought to be medically possible. And this is just being way underutilised in healthcare. And the ridiculous thing is that the data on this shows you don't only get better outcomes, you get better quality of life, people feel better than they have for many years, but also the cost savings are amazing. Because people don't go on to have all of the aggressive treatments otherwise would have had if they'd just done treatment as usual. Now, it wasn't a neglecting of, appropriate monitoring and everything else. It wasn't a rejection of conventional medicine. It was just saying, all right, well, you do the monitoring and the managing all of that, but do this as well, you get disease reversal, only with high level of adherence. So massive cost savings, but the industry is not geared towards saving money. The healthcare system is, and various elements of it, which I won't go into, geared around increasing healthcare costs, and which is a real shame because these aren't patentable products. So there's not the economic drivers to promote them in the same way as there is various patentable products.